Okay, I apologise again for the microphone not working. There is a couple of little videos with it still not working, and then we'll get it back on. Anyway, I'm just explaining here that the engine's supported up the top from the front, and that main bolt that goes through the rear of the engine, but it also goes through the frame and the swing arm. So you've potentially got a issue where you take that main bolt out and you can have the rear wheel slip out and the frame drop while you're supporting the engine and trying to lower it. But anyway, just taking the side cover up here, using the impact driver, not even going to attempt to try and take them out. You might as well give it a hit. Not going to be reusing these screws anyway, and we just give them a hit straight off, shock them out. They're all going to come out now without any dramas. You know, why make it hard? This cover holds the ignition and the regeneration battery. Started the starter motor at the front, and won't contain oil, although it does have a gasket. I think it's more of a water gasket to stop the water come in, although there is an air hole in the top of the case around near the gasket that will allow for expansion or a little bit of moisture to come out in once it warms up, that type of thing. Surprisingly nice and clean in there, except for where the oil leak is. Yeah, see the gasket around here, and you can actually see there is a vent hole on top around the back there underneath the gasket. The good thing about it is that it's pretty freaking spotless, to be honest. Just siliconed on, I'd say. No 3-bond or anything like that. I don't think it's really necessary to put anything on it, really. Just maybe a little bit of stuff just to keep the gasket there while you're putting it on. Just going to take the engine sprocket off now. Just notice that these two bolts, they were tight, but they didn't really have any Loctite on. I'd probably put a little bit of thread locker on or something like that, because it's probably one of the last things you'd want to come off as you're going along the road. Just saw a video recently that guy's riding down the road and all of a sudden his chain comes off, disintegrates, and pulls over, gets off, and then pulls part of the chain out of embedded into his left boot, which was quite surprising. Pulled about 4 links of chain out. Now this sprocket, no wear on it, looks good. Looks like someone's obviously replaced it at some stage. It's definitely not genuine. Not that that matters, it just means that someone's actually done something and replaced an engine sprocket. And the rear sprocket looks pretty much the same as well. The chain looks good as well, so they probably just got it as a whole kit. Just put the screws back in and the locking plate so the whole thing can be washed up together. And throw it into the wash bin. It's kind of behind the camera. Drop chain off, not interested in that anymore. what I've done is I've just cleaned up the deck a little bit so I've got some space to work. Put a jack stand under the frame on the other side, because I'm thinking that once I take that bolt out, the back's going to want to drop down, and I really want the scissor to hold the engine up so I can lower it down and throw it onto the bench. So I'm just going to support the engine, see what the frame wants to do. I really want it in a situation where the whole thing stays where that is and I can just deal with the engine in the heavy part while it's doing its thing. So I'm just making sure it's going to sit there. Hugger-dugger the nut off. You got three things to manoeuvre to get this bolt out. You got the frame, the swing arm, and the engine, which is now loose. And you might have realised that as soon as I locked that bolt out, the whole thing, the engine moves down a bit. So I'm just trying to get it into a position with the right weight on it, so that bolt's happy to come out without everything jumping. If you're tapping on a bolt and it's rock hard and it doesn't want to come out, there's two reasons. It's either corroded in there, or it's or you've got weight on it, or something is not happy. But as you can see, everything down there is wet from engine oil, and which is not a bad thing in this case, because that bolt would have been probably pretty corroded if it hadn't been leaking. So it's a self-lubricating system. Yeah, just moving everything around just to see what it wants to do. I don't think it wants to do anything, I've realised that it's probably sitting on the stand at the other side. Engine's supported by the scissor. Take the mounts out. All I'm interested in at this stage is getting rid of those, getting this engine onto the bench. Bolt out, bolt out, bolt out. And some dickhead left a nut still on a bolt. Can't get good help. Get my little hugger-dugger. Just taking that last bolt out, therefore nothing will be holding that engine up except for one thing I didn't realise. There is another bolt down below the main bolt that goes through a bracket which is screwed onto the back of the frame, in which I'll show you in a second. So the nut's off. Just going to try and tap it through this way. It's like a little U-shaped frame, little U-shaped bracket that holds it on either side with two 12mm bolts into the frame, into the bracket. It's just might have been, they push the engine up in there, put the top on, put this front on, put this back one on, and then it goes down the production line, and then the swing arm gets pushed in there, and then the main bolt goes through. So it kind of holds the back to where it wants to be, or it needs to be. More of an assembly thing rather than a actual support. Yeah, I can just get my ugger in there with 12mm. There it is, see? Relaxes straight away. And you cannot get that bolt, the long bolt, through the engine without kicking it over a little bit. So it's not a natural sort of pull out. It's in the way. The frame's in the way of that bolt. So it has to come away with the engine almost. There it is there. So I'm going to make sure that when we put the engine back in, that's already in there with that delicate, I will say, very delicate little U-shaped bolt. And the rustiest bolt I've found so far. Yeah, just leave it there. And the jack stand's doing nothing, to be honest. So that really the issue of moving it. Look how wet it is behind that engine there. Yeah, some dickhead couldn't put the bolt back in because, it goes from the other side. What I'm just going to do is just obviously support that swing arm for temporary, throw the bolt back through. Oh, look at that. When you put it in the right way, it goes. Smart. Now I'm just going to bolt up all these mounts so they can all get washed together. Also, I can buff the heads of the bolts up and everything while they're on the mount rather than just holding it. And I know where they all come from. It's rare. It's a rare thing that I do that, but I usually just leave shit all over the place. And that's that little U-shaped mount. Now, I'm sure I'm saying something that's inspirational here, but I might be talking about your girlfriend, who knows. But what we're going to do is we're going to just strip this motor down, mainly for oil leaks. There's nothing that tells me that there's anything wrong with it, but there's nothing that tells me there isn't something wrong either. I was quite prepared to just do a rear seal and piston rings on this thing, but you never know until you pull it down what it's actually like. I also lap valves, make sure all that's okay as well. So I'm just going to start with taking the valve covers, the tappet covers off, which someone has kindly replaced with Allen keys, because that would have been a service item. Someone obviously did some service on it at some stage during its life. And another indication that this engine had been sitting around for a long time. Not only was the oil filter completely bone dry because it had all drained out, but also all the way up the top here, which you wouldn't expect the oil to sit anyway, but when you get these covers off, you can actually see in there that it's been dry for a long time. I love that little hammer. Just tap it in. Tap, tap, tap. See? Bone dry. Nothing in there. Nothing to see. Boring as. Got a seal in it. There you go. Tap, tap, tap. Clearance set. Oh, God. I try to drop it. There you go. Yeah, I realised about half an hour ago that I do not have a pulley for this magneto cover. And I thought, probably not going to get too far with this engine strip, but I actually surprised on how far I could get. But as I speak now, I'm still waiting for this pulley to come. I don't know if I've talked to you before about Australia Post. Because they all ride Hondas, they take ages and ages to come. You know, you just can't tell them. But anyway, I do have one coming, and I have a lot of other parts coming as well. Cam chain cover, very clean. It was leaking, that was pouring out. You can see where it's etched around from past that seal, where all that seal is still wet, and all around there. So that was definitely leaking from there. So the oil leaks on this thing were the rear sprocket drive shaft. That seal's rock hard. Coming from that cam chain cover, and it was also coming from the tensioner as well. So, I mean, the easiest thing to do here would be get an ugga-dugga, but I've got a spanner in my hand, it's got a nice length on it. Let's just see if I can actually crack this. There it goes, see? You know, I just knew for some reason it's going to come off. A little plastic cover that goes over this tensioner. I don't know if it's supposed to have an O-ring in there or not, but it was leaking. Yeah, there's the O-ring, yeah. Yeah, I've seen people when they want to take cam chains off and all the rest of it, because we're stripping this right down, I mean, chain's going to come out anyway. What I've seen them do is they spend the next half an hour putting it on top dead centre and knowing where the chain is and knowing where the cam, camies and making sure that piston's on the top and all the rest of it. Why? You're pulling it all down. Like, who cares where it is? You only have to care about it when it's going back together. Undo the lock nut, you dick. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, undo the lock nut. Oh, yeah, crack. Yeah, oh, look at that. It's all loose. Who would have thought? Spring and a plunger. No hydraulic adjustment on these motors, just pure old-fashioned spring and plunger. Tighten it up until the spring's under tension, and then as the chain grows, that's already off. Yeah, that's right. We undid it before. That can come off. We're not worried about dropping anything in because the whole thing's coming apart. It doesn't matter. Drop the chain off and the chain disappears. Yep, bye. Well, I haven't got the head apart yet, so... I really apologise about this sound. It's really frustrating. It almost made me put the whole friggin' thing back together and start again. But, it doesn't help with the end sort of product, and it would have just taken an hour or so, and I hate going backwards. So if you're still with us, I really am sorry about what happened with the sound, but this is the last video that it's happened on, so if you can bear with me, all we're doing is just stripping the engine down a little bit. Now it's time for off with its head. That one's stuck on a gasket by the feel of it. It's really good that they've done the way they've done these bolts. The reason is they've actually tapered the centres of them to stay away from the aluminium, and when you run, so that you got the thread into the steel or into the aluminium, the bottom, then they've tapered the bolt all the way up towards the head so that the bolt doesn't corrode against the aluminium with electrolysis. What a great idea. It would have been fantastic if the GSs would have done that as well. But instead they put the same size bolt down the same size hole, and you end up with, you can't get the barrels off the block because the bolts are seized into the actual barrel. Don't break fins. Not too bad, very clean. Definitely wasn't leaking. Even around the oil galleries there was no leaking from there, so I'd say it was more the cam cover seal rather than the head gasket that was leaking. I was interested to know whether the valves were leaking. Because it's got a round top, it doesn't want to sit anywhere. So the closest thing to hand is just some WD. Make sure that the cam is on off the lobes, and there is clearance. So yeah, I just found that old coffee tin has a lot of bolts in it. Set it up there and I fill it up with WD and see if it actually leaks out the valve seats. While I go on, I can sit up there for ages, it doesn't really matter. There was no initial leaks, it didn't come straight out, so it tells me that the valves are seated. Just had to make sure that the cam was not touching the rockers at all, and there was clearance on both rockers to be able to do it. Obviously that means that the valves are closed. Now that's not definitive, because if they had been sitting around for a little while, and of course we're moving it as we're stripping it down, if it had been sitting around for a little while, then there might have been some grit under one of the valves. But given the condition of the barrel itself and the piston, what I've actually found is that this one must have been sitting. As you can see, that barrel is absolutely perfect. So I would say this has been sitting at a point where both those valves were closed. The pitting is not, it's just grit from just a bit of carbon that's dropped in while I was pulling it down. That is perfect, that barrel, and I'll show you in a later video that once it's actually been got all the carbon scraped out of it and scuffed out of it with a bit of emery, the barrel and piston is absolutely perfect. There is wear on it, but there is nothing there are no north-south marks, nothing. The barrel is glazed, it just needs a hone and some new rings at this stage, and there is nothing wrong with it. Now that was must have been sitting at a point where those two valves were closed, so that's lucky. Now think of it, if you had a multi-cylinder, like a 4-cylinder, or even a 2, if one's closed, the other's open. So you've got a potential risk there if you have an exhaust valve that's stuck open, or been sitting open for 10 years, then you've got moisture potentially coming in and just sitting on the side of that bore and all the rest of it. And the bore you look at is fine, but the other one will definitely be open. If you've got 4 cylinders, you're going to have 2 or 3 that are open. So by running it after, it's been sitting for so long, you're running, the risk. In this case, it probably wouldn't have done much damage. But, you're running that risk. It's a gamble. Definitely one cylinder's closed. Definitely one's on a 4-cylinder, the other one's completely open on both valves. And then on the other 2, you've got an inlet and an exhaust open. So, you're completely running that risk. In this case, I've been extremely lucky with having probably both those valves closed, if not just the exhaust valve closed, and it's a lot harder to come past the air filter, the carburetor into the inlet valve than it is just to travel up the exhaust. I mean, you saw the condition of that exhaust, so it could have been like a catastrophe. It could have been completely and utterly rusted out and left, but just been very, very lucky in this case. So anyway, I'm just looking at piston. I'm going to take this piston off, take the wrist pin out, just flicking out the little circlips that like to disappear on you. You know, normally in this sort of situation you would have rags and everything around the conrod to make sure that the little circlip doesn't drop through into the engine and disappear. But of course we're splitting the case, so in that case it doesn't really matter. So I've got the little circlip out, and you know, thinking that the wrist pin will just come straight out. Of course it won't, because there's carbon on either side of it. There's also a section in the middle where it goes through one side of the piston into the conrod. There's a little gap there that they tend to build carbon up as well, and then you're trying to push the exact size pin through the exact size hole with carbon on it, and it just does not play the game half the time. But that tells you a couple of things as well. If that pin is hard to get out, it means the clearance is pretty good. If that pin just drops out, well then, you know, it means that the hole's opened up to a point where it can allow 3,000 or 4,000, or you know, 0.5 of a mil or something like that to allow that pin to come through. So the fact that it's tight means it's good, in other words. There it is there. So you can see that little gap between the conrod and the piston. And that's pretty much all it gets stuck on. And there we go. Once you get it past that, and it goes on to the wearable part again, it's no carbon there, so that's fine. WD. Get that wrist pin back through. Or do I take it out? I don't know. Yeah, I took it out. I was wanted to find out if there's any grooves or anything on it. Drop it in the case, that's the way. There's no marks on that conrod at all, and there's no marks on that wrist pin. They really built these motors well. I'm just checking the lateral plate, if there's any twist in that bearing down the bottom, and I can't feel anything. There's a little bit of side to side movement that there is supposed to be. I think it's probably, I'm not sure, I think I looked up the specs the other day, it was 0.4 or something like this either side, so you're going to get side movement across the thing. There's a wear on the face of the piston. Mainly what I'm looking at here is the gapping between the rings. So it tells you exactly sort of what it does, what it's been doing. So you've got the oil control ring spreading oil and holding oil back from the combustion. It's probably not doing a fantastic job, but you've got a nice clear space between the second and first ring, most of it, so they've been doing it. Please like and subscribe, and I promise to have sound back.